on me! Focus on me! Woo! Hey guys, it's Amy here, back again with another video. I've made a decision. I decided, you know what? I want to get into AuthorTube tags. I have one that I am going to be doing later, but that's going to be for a very important date and an important event coming up later this year. But I also wanted to kind of contribute to the tags myself, because when it comes to me and the kinds of tags that I like to do or am drawn to, it's always about what is interesting to me. What do I think needs to be represented a bit more in the reading, writing, AuthorTube, book talk sort of spheres? And then two things came up. One, I want to get to know my fellow AuthorTubers better, and I think that this tag that I'm about to bring to you guys will do that. Two, when it comes to a lot of authors and popular authors especially, they're always from the same two places. They're either from the UK or they're from the US. What about the rest of us little guys like New Zealand? Which is where I'm from, in case you didn't know. So I developed the Hometown AuthorTube tag. This tag has got 7 questions to get to know both the writers in your hometown, the inspirations from where you grew up in your hometown, and things of the like. Hometown can be a bit ambiguous here, so you can use hometown for your country, for your state, or for your city, depending on what you are comfortable with disclosing. And it could also refer to the one that you are currently living in or the one that you grew up in. I'm gonna just be doing my country for this because New Zealand is so tiny. There are 7 questions and also 3 people that you need to tag at the end. So we're just going to dive right into the 7 questions. Question 1, what state or country are you from? Tell us what it's famous for. Let me tell you a bit about New Zealand. We'll start off with some of the stuff that you already know. New Zealand, it's in the southern hemisphere and we're the first country, or one of the first, to see the new day, which makes time zones and communicating with you guys a little bit hard. New Zealand is off the coast of Australia, and some people think it's just a state of Australia. We are very, very different. The main way that I compare New Zealand to Australia is that New Zealand is to Australia the same thing that Canada is to the US. We have some similar cultural associations and proximity, but in all of it, we're just, separate. You guys probably know New Zealand for being the country that a majority of The Lord of the Rings was filmed in, and also the place where the technical department has come from. New Zealand is also famous for Lord Taika Waititi and that dude who plays Archie in Riverdale. I do not know his name, I don't watch Riverdale, I do not care for Riverdale. For me, and most Kiwis' perception of New Zealand, that can be included, but we more associate it with our indigenous culture, which is called Maori, sometimes for political reasons, sometimes for aesthetic reasons, and of course the people who identify it as their culture. But I think the one thing that is definitely the most appreciated in Maori culture is kapahaka. Lush scenery. This is probably one that both us in New Zealand and everyone in the rest of the world knows as well. Like, we have got so many big places for people who love the outdoors and hiking and stuff. And of course, pavlova. We are in an outright war with Australia over who made it first, but we have the earliest known recipe thus far. For those of you who don't know, pavlova is really nice. It's sort of like a meringue in like a big cake form, but the center is way softer. It's so nice. We have it like every single Christmas. This is like the go-to Kiwi Christmas dessert dish. Question 2, what about your hometown has inspired what you write? For me, in the particular area of New Zealand that I live in, that would be the diversity. I have always been inclined to write from a very diverse perspective because I was brought up around so many cultures. This might just be because the area that I live in has a particularly high intake of immigrants, and it's where our international airport is. One of them, I think, actually. Another one would probably be, of course, our nature and our bushland, because when you see a lot of other natures and bushlands in other countries, it's either very deserty or very traditional redwoods kind of a forest, but we've got so much unique flora that I really like to take inspiration from those when I come up with flora and fauna in fantasy worlds. I guess that makes sense why a lot of films decide to get forests in New Zealand for fantasy and sci-fi based things, because it looks so different compared to other forests. Number 3, what books are set in your hometown? A majority of New Zealand books will take place in New Zealand. That's just because I think of our publishing industries. They're very sort of nationalistic, where they like to feature a lot of contemporary stories that take place in New Zealand, with bonus points if it features Maori or Polynesian cultures. I wouldn't entirely know this from an outside perspective, but I think the most famous one that takes place in New Zealand, just because of how often it is studied in English classes in New Zealand, would be The Whale Rider. But then again, I do not know how big it is outside of New Zealand. Also, this was like one that won a really big literary award. The Luminaries? That one was very huge. It was taking place in the New Zealand Gold Rush a long time ago, and that got turned into a TV series by, I think it was the BBC? I haven't watched or read either of those. I do have plans to eventually, it's just my TBR is already way too big. Number 4, who would be the most famous author from your hometown? Children's authors, mainly, at least in New Zealand. I have no idea if these authors are big internationally, but there's 3 particular children's authors that are very, very huge in New Zealand. Those particular 3 would be Lily Dodd. She wrote these children's books about a dog called Harry McClary and a bunch of his animal friends. I used to love getting read these books as a kid. And then there's Margaret Mahy and Joy Cowley. They have done both kids chapter books and kids picture books. So in New Zealand, I think those 3 authors are the most famous. If you told somebody name a New Zealand author, they would likely say one of those 3. If they say anybody else, they're likely going to be a thorough bookworm. Number 5, what other authors come from your hometown? Back in intermediate school, which is the most useless equivalent to middle school in the world, we actually met a proper New Zealand author who wrote kids' books. His name was Jack Abelinsky. I haven't really read much by him when he came, but he made all these different stories and made a bunch of different speeches. He actually came to my class and my school because my friend at the time knew him, had a connection to him. But he came and did some talks, and that was a really, really cool experience. Also, one of the books that I read this year, The Liminal Space by Jackie McCrae, that author went to the same university that I did, and that was something really, really exciting to see, because it literally mentioned in her author bio that she went to this university. Those would be 2 other ones that I really appreciated and I've had personal sorts of connections with. I definitely want to be able to find more New Zealand authors. Even cooler would be more New Zealand authors on YouTube and on TikTok, so I can connect with them better. If you know any, please put them in the comments. I would love to get in touch with them. Number 6, are any of the books that you write or are going to write set in your hometown? Well, anybody who's read Aster's Coda, that's set in New Zealand, at least partially, because it's a urban portal kind of fantasy. Abby's hometown is Rotorua, which is a very big tourist hotspot for a bunch of spa places, and then also action adventure stuff. There's a really cool luge there that I went on. So that's where that particular one is set. And there are going to be events in which Abby has to end up leaving Rotorua and explore other parts of New Zealand, just to kind of give a bit of a broader stroke on the country. I do want to represent New Zealand a lot more, especially in the fantasy side of things, but so far it's only the Aster's Coda series that I have planned that takes place there. There may be other ones in the future, but that will just depend on what ends up happening in my head. And number 7, what about your hometown would you like to see represented more? I want to see more New Zealand-based fantasy and New Zealand authors writing fantasy. especially when it involves indigenous cultures. Because I was taught a little bit of Maori mythology in school, and they've got some really, really cool stuff in there. Nothing like what you see in Moana. Moana absolutely butchered and generalized Maori and Polynesian cultures. I'm referring to more specific kind of things that actually pull into mythology, such as the gods and Tanifas and Maui, as we know him as a trickster demigod, kind of in the same breath as Loki, but good. Because I will admit that the publishing industry in New Zealand is not very favorable towards fantasy. That was one of the reasons I decided to publish as an indie author. They have like a bunch of biases towards celebrities, non-fiction, anything that represents New Zealand in a contemporary setting. It's kind of snobby. And thus far, I'm not a contemporary writer in terms of, you know, writing novels. Contemporary stories that I have come up with are more likely to be suited in a film setting. But it's very hard as well, because when New Zealand authors want to write fantasy, they don't want it to be set in New Zealand. They're either setting it in a high fantasy area, or they're setting it in like typical places like the US and the UK. So of course that was one of the reasons why I decided to set Author's Coda in New Zealand, is because I wanted to be represented more. I really hope that me and some other authors around the place will be able to represent that. So that's the end of the tag, and now it's time to get tagging. I'm gonna be tagging Ben Pick of Running to Right, J.M. Shaley, and Megan Aldridge. You guys go ahead and have a blast with this tag. And if anybody else wants to take up this tag for themselves, then go ahead. Just make sure to link this original video in the description and pop the questions down just like I have below. I hope you have fun with this tag, guys. I'm so excited to also take on more tags as well. This is going to be fun. So that's where we're going to be ending this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you are new around here. You can ring that bell to find out when I post more creative content. Get yourself a copy of Author's Coda Exposure as well while you're at it. It takes place in my home country of New Zealand, and it's a fantastic fantasy novel. Follow Abby Tacker as she learns about the three worlds and an otherworldly blood feud that has her dragged into them. And of course, you can check me out on TikTok, Instagram, Fiverr, and my website. Stay creative, everybody, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.